Next guest needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. The great outsider from London, Brendan O'Neill, who stayed up extra late to chat to us. So good to see you, Brendan. A great voice on Brexit. You're now urging Boris Johnson to show leadership to get out of the lockdown. Welcome to Outsiders. Brendan, talk us through it.
Yeah, we need to get out of this lockdown. It is a disaster. It's a disaster for the economy. It's a disaster for public health. There's now growing evidence that people in the United Kingdom are suffering from heart attacks and cancers that are going undetected because hospitals have been shut off to everything except for COVID-19. And it's a disaster for freedom. We don't have our basic liberties and our basic democratic rights anymore. So I'm really worried about the impact that this lockdown is having across the board. I think it's really time for us to get out of it now.
Brendan, you've criticised Sadiq Khan. Rita and James and I were talking about the various measures, the police overreach in this country and other countries. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, not doing a great job in your opinion.
Well, he rarely does a good job on anything, but on the lockdown, the police overreach in the UK is crazy, absolutely crazy. They've been using drones to film people walking their dogs in the Peak District. We've seen people's front doors being broken down by the police on suspicion that they were having a party. And Sadiq Khan has now started to describe COVID-19 as an issue of racial injustice because the disease, for various reasons, the disease impacts upon ethnic minority groups more than it does on non-ethnic minority groups. And instead of seeing this as a possible consequence of certain health issues and living conditions in some of those communities, he has described it as an injustice to try and make it a woke cause. So I think he's really lost the plot on that.
Rita.
Well, yes, the coronavirus is racist and sexist. I think that's just plain science. Now, I want to ask you about if you've been surprised by the eagerness so many of your fellow citizens have embraced these new restrictions. It seems like some enjoy living in a virtual police state and love dobbing on their neighbours.
Yeah, that side of it's been really shocking. It's like we have a kind of COVID Stasi emerging in the UK, where people are, taking great relish in grassing up their neighbours to the police if they go for a second jog. Some police forces have said that they've been inundated with calls from people about people who are walking their dogs too much or running too much or sitting on park benches. I was told to get out of Hyde Park by a police officer because I was sitting on a bench. So it's complete overreach, and that's the part of it that's really irritating some people. But you're right, Rita. I think one of the concerning things in the UK is that too many of our citizens have warmed to this climate too speedily for my liking.
James.
I want to shift gears and maybe just look at some of the slightly lighter side of this, Brendan. I want to get your reaction to this story. A women's studies professor at Oxford University this week wrote that she was really hoping that Oxford didn't wind up winning the race to develop a vaccine for the coronavirus, because it would underline this whole narrative that Britain saved the world and it would be good for the Tories, and it would, say good things about the patriarchy and white people and all sorts of things like that, and that she was hoping that Oxford didn't actually succeed in this. What do you make of this, that people are still so politically correct in the midst of this pandemic?
I mean, it's such an amazing story and such a revealing story that, Oxford is now doing pretty well in developing a vaccine. They're relatively confident that it could work. Let's see. And then we have this women's studies lecturer saying, oh, this would be terrible because it would make Britain look like the white savior and it would make China look like the evil force that unleashed the virus on the world. They can't let go of their woke politics. Even in a pandemic, even when people are dying, the first thing that comes to their minds is not how do we save people's lives, but how do we protect political correctness? How do we make sure Britain doesn't look like a good country? How do we maintain our snooty, woke view of the United Kingdom as this kind of horrible post-empire nation that doesn't deserve any respect? That's literally the first thing that comes into their mind. So it shows how utterly warped woke politics is. And it also suggests that it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Well, also, what's not going anywhere anytime soon, Brendan, is anti-Semitism in the British Labour Party, a topic we've talked about a lot in the past. Andrew Neil, my boss, publisher of The Spectator, and a good mate of yours. Andrew Neil is also a BBC host, and he did this interview with Richard Bergen, I think his name is. He's the new Labour MP, minister, I think, shadow minister. Just have a look at the interview and then we'll discuss it and tell us what was going on here.
The Labour Party meeting, did you not, in 2016, that Zionism is the enemy of peace?
Well, that was an allegation made by the Daily Express. I asked them at which meeting I was meant to have said that.
I think it was reported in the Daily Mail.
But
Did
they
you
couldn't
say
respond
that?
to me. I didn't say that, and they couldn't tell me when they believed I had said that.
And the enemy of the Palestinian people is not the Jewish people. The enemy of the Palestinian people are Zionists. And Zionism is the enemy of peace and the enemy of the Palestinian people. And we need to be loud, we need to be proud in support of a free Palestine. I make no apologies. I'm proud to say, not only wouldn't I be a member of Labour Friends of Israel, I've never been a member of Labour Friends of Israel, and I'm all for everyone's opinions being out there and everyone having their opinion treated with respect. But look up on the internet, because it's there to see on the Labour Friends of Israel website which MPs are members of Labour Friends of Israel, which Labour MPs are officers of Labour Friends of Israel, and ask them, in support of the Palestinian people, in protest of what's happening in Gaza now, to resign from Labour Friends of Israel to show support for all humanity.
So, Brendan, this bloke is the Shadow Justice Minister, yet a few years ago it sounded like he was basically calling for some kind of blacklisting of Jews. What was going on there?
Well, you know, the Labour Party in this country is just a complete disgrace. You know, we know over the past few years when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, it had a serious problem with anti-Semitism, and that was reflected in some of those comments we just saw there. You know, this obsessive hatred of Israel, this obsessive hatred of Zionism, completely out of proportion and driven by a complete double standard. Israel was always judged by a different standard to every other nation on earth, which in itself is an anti-Semitic outlook. But now we have, of course, apparently a new dawn with a new leader, Keir Starmer. But in truth, you know, Keir Starmer was the author of Labour's disastrous Brexit policy, which was going to demand a second referendum, which is why so many people didn't vote for them at the last election. So now we have the party being run by a supposed centrist, Keir Starmer, who's actually a rabid Remainer, and he's still surrounded by Corbynistas like Richard Bergen and others who have, you know, questionable views on lots of issues. The Labour Party in this country is a completely lost cause, and I think lots of people now realise that.
Rita?
I want to ask you quickly about the media in the UK. There's been some polling that's come out that shows that trust in the media during coronavirus is at rock bottom. How have they conducted themselves?
Disgracefully. The media in this country has behaved completely disgracefully in the coronavirus pandemic. It's not news reporting at all, really. It's just this constant barking of cynical questions at government ministers. And it's all driven by a desire to pin the blame for the virus on Boris Johnson and on his ministers. They're really searching for culpability. They want to pin culpability on Boris for a virus, which is just completely ludicrous and completely immoral. He has no control over where viruses come from and how they spread. Of course, the government should and has been devoting a huge amount of resources to offsetting the worst impact of the virus. But the media obsession with blaming ministers for every death, for blaming ministers for the pandemic in the first place, I think that's really making people sick and tired of the media. And as you say, our trust in the media has plummeted during this pandemic. You know, between 60 and 70% of people don't trust the media when it comes to COVID-19. So the media is making a complete show of itself. They've become very cynical. It's very partisan. And people just want to return to cool-headed, rational news reporting.
James, one quick last question before we go.
Very quickly, Brendan, is there a class element to these lockdowns? Have you found that there's a class divide in who's calling for it to be stronger and who's actually copping the brunt of it?
Complete class divide. I think, you know, we have privileged elites at home making their sourdough bread and their podcasts and, you know, with their nice gardens and their big houses, and they're loving it. And anyone who lives in a tiny flat or who wants to go back to work or who's worried about not having a job in the future, they just look down their noses at those people as being, moaning riffraff. I think there's a real class divide on this. And I think the people who are enjoying the lockdown are the kind of privileged elites, whereas lots of other people are deeply concerned about the future of the economy, the future of their own livelihoods, and the future of freedom. So it's another one of those issues where the tensions tell us a lot about the divides in our society.
Brendan O'Neill, I'll never look at sourdough the same again. You put me right off it, mate. Thanks so much for staying up so late tonight, Brendan. Outsiders here in Australia love you and love you being on the show. Keep safe and keep the fight going, mate. That's what we want. Thanks so much, Brendan O'Neill.